please stand and we'll have the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I got you, Sarah.
Thank you. 1.2, our moment of silence.
Eternal God, again, we thank you for this opportunity. We pray your blessings upon us as servants, Lord, to this city. We beg you, Lord, to teach us to be peaceful, teach us how to negotiate with dignity. We pray, Lord, especially, Lord, for the lives that are being lost due to mistakes with the guns. Father God, we thank you just again for having such a country, Lord, where we still can express our freedoms. And God, as I close this prayer, we still believe in God blessing America. Amen.
Amen. 1.3, the approval of the minutes for the regular meeting of Board of Mayor and Aldermen held on March 21st, 2023. We have a motion by Alderman Green and a second by Vice Mayor Harris. Are there any corrections to the minutes? No corrections, we're ready to vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 1.4 is our public hearings. Our first public hearing is public hearing number 1, ordinance 23-06, a ordinance amending the fiscal year 2023's annual budget for the city of Springfield by amending certain general funds and utility funds operating budget. If you would like to speak, please come to the mic, state your name, and you have 2 minutes. No one would like to speak? The public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 2, ordinance 2307, a ordinance rescinding ordinance 2201 in its entirety and establishing a new schedule of fees and charges for play at the Legacy Golf Course. If you would like to speak, please come to the mic. State your name. You have 2 minutes. Anyone like to speak? If not, the public hearing is closed. 2.0, our legislative agenda. 2.1, discuss and possible take action on ordinance 23-06 on a second and final reading. A ordinance amending the fiscal year 2023's annual budget for the city of Springfield by amending certain general funds and utility funds operating budgets. A motion by Alderman Hubbard, a second by Alderman Green to discuss. I'm going to go on our city manager, Mr. Ryan Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. This one needs to be amended on second reading. We're winding down the fiscal year here, and so this is the second to last budget amendment that we will have. We'll have one for you next month as we close out the end of the fiscal year. But this one needs to be amended. You can see in your packet the amendments. One is related to Freedom Fest, and there is also the technology fee that needs to be amended as well.
Thank you. Discussion on this item. Motion.
A motion to amend.
Second.
I can't see the motion.
Motion to amend and second.
I don't see it.
Harris and Hubbard.
Vice Mayor Harris and a second by Alderman Hubbard. Any questions on the amendment? No questions? We're ready for a vote on the amendment. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Back to the main motion as amended. Any discussion? No discussion? No questions? We're ready for a vote as amended. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 2.2, discuss and possible take action on the ordinance 23-07 on a second and final reading. Or ordinance rescinding ordinance 22-01 in its entirety and establishing a new schedule of fees and charges for play at the Legacy Golf Course. Motion made by Vice Mayor Harris. A second. My screen's gone away. A motion was made by Vice Mayor Harris and a second by Alderman Hubbard. Any discussion on this new fees? I sure noticed there was a lot of play going on at Legacy Golf Course. It's good to see. Of course, we have one of the best golf courses in the state of Tennessee, so that's the reason there's a lot of play. No discussion? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
I'm sorry, folks. Bear with me with my voice. I love spring, but it doesn't like me. 2.3, discuss and possible take action on ordinance 23-08 on a first reading. A ordinance amending ordinance 14-14 relative to the adoption of a building code. I'm going to call on Miss Melissa Brown to read this on a first reading.
Ordinance 23-08, an ordinance amending Title 12, Chapter 1 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Building Codes. Whereas the Board of Mayor and Aldermen desires to update the building codes of the city of Springfield, and whereas it is necessary to adopt a building code establishing the minimum regulations governing the conditions and maintenance of all property, buildings, and structures, by providing the standards for supplied utilities and facilities, and other physical things and conditions essential to ensure that structures are safe, sanitary, and fit for occupation and use, and the condemnation of buildings and structures unfit for human occupancy and use, and the demolition of such structures. And whereas it is necessary to adopt a residential building code regulating the design, construction, quality of materials, erection, installation, alteration, repair, location, relocation, replacement, addition to, use or maintenance of 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses not more than 3 stories in height, and providing for the issuance of permits and collection of fees therefor. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen of Springfield, Tennessee as follows. Ordinance 14-14 and 18-11 are hereby rescinded in its entirety, and Title 12 of the Springfield Municipal Code is hereby amended by deleting Chapter 1 entitled Building Codes in its entirety and substituting a new Chapter 1 entitled Building Codes to read as set forth in Exhibit A attached. All ordinances, resolutions, and policies in conflict herewith are hereby rescinded to the extent of the conflict only.
Thank you. Motion was made by Alderman Hubbard, a second by Alderman Green to discuss. I'm going to call on our city manager, Mr. Ryan Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. As you notice, board members, on the agenda tonight, we have, I believe, 7 total codes that, 8 total codes that we're updating. And so I apologize that Ms. Brown was going to be reading all these first readings tonight. We've been working on this for about 18 months, getting everything situated, lining things up for how that needs to be updated. But these are moving all of the existing codes that we have, which are the 2012 codes, to the 2018 version. The International Code Council updates each code every 3 years. So the latest one out is the 2021 code. However, we're adopting the 2020 or 2018 code to be consistent with the state of Tennessee, as well as most of the cities in Middle Tennessee around us. The state of Tennessee currently has in effect the 2018 code, and that's where we have recommended you all to head toward tonight.
You promised us this was coming.
I did.
Questions on this? Discussion? Yes, sir?
I'm glad we're staying up to date, brother.
No questions? If there are no questions, we're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 2.4, discuss and possible take action on ordinance 23-09, or ordinance amending ordinance 14-15 relative to the adoption of the plumbing code. Motion made by Alderman Hubbard, a second by Alderman Trotter to discuss. Miss Melissa, it's your turn.
Ordinance number 23-09, an ordinance amending Title 12, Chapter 2 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Plumbing Code. Whereas the Board of Mayor and Aldermen recognize the need for a modern, up-to-date plumbing code addressing the design and installation of plumbing systems through requirements emphasizing performance, and whereas the International Plumbing Code is designed to meet these needs through model code regulations that safeguard the public health and safety in all communities, large and small. And whereas this comprehensive plumbing code establishes minimum regulations for plumbing using prescriptive and performance-related provisions. And whereas it is founded on broad-based principles that make possible the use of new materials and new plumbing designs. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen of Springfield, Tennessee as follows. Ordinance 14-15 is hereby rescinded in its entirety, and Title 12 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Building, Utility, etc. Codes is hereby amended by deleting Chapter 2 entitled Plumbing Code in its entirety and substituting a new Chapter 2 to read as set forth in Exhibit A attached. All ordinances, resolutions, and policies in conflict herewith are hereby rescinded to the extent of the conflict only.
Thank you. Questions on the plumbing code? No questions? No discussion? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 2.5, discuss and possible take action on ordinance 23-10, or ordinance amending ordinance 14-16 relative to the adoption of the mechanical codes. Motion made by Alderman Hubbard to discuss. A second by Alderman Gregg. I will call on Ms. Brown to read this on a first reading.
Ordinance 23-10, an ordinance amending Title 12, Chapter 4 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Mechanical Code. Whereas code officials recognize the need for a modern, up-to-date mechanical code addressing the design and installation of mechanical systems and emphasizing performance. And whereas the International Mechanical Code is designed to meet these needs through model code regulations that safeguard the public health and safety in all communities, large and small. And whereas this comprehensive mechanical code establishes minimum regulations for mechanical systems using prescriptive and performance-related provisions. And whereas it is founded on broad-based principles that make possible the use of new materials and new mechanical system designs. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen of Springfield, Tennessee as follows. Ordinance 14-16 is hereby rescinded in its entirety, and Title 12 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Building, Utility, etc. Codes is hereby amended by deleting Chapter 4 entitled Mechanical Code in its entirety and substituting a new Chapter 4 to read as set forth in Exhibit A attached. All ordinances, resolutions, and policies in conflict herewith are hereby rescinded to the extent of the conflict only.
Thank you. Any questions on this? Ordinance 23-10. No discussion? No questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 2.6, discuss and possible take action on ordinance 23-11, or ordinance amending ordinance 14-17 relative to the adoption of the property maintenance codes. Motion made by Alderman Green, and a second. Second by Alderman Gregg to discuss. I'll call on Ms. Melissa Brown to read the first reading.
Ordinance 23-11, an ordinance amending Title 12, Chapter 7 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Property Maintenance Code. Whereas the Board of Mayor and Aldermen desires to adopt a new property maintenance code of the City of Springfield, and whereas it is necessary to adopt a new property maintenance code regulating and governing the conditions and maintenance of all property, buildings, and structures by providing the standards for supplied utilities and facilities and other physical things and conditions essential to ensure that structures are safe, sanitary, and fit for occupation and use, and the condemnation of buildings and structures unfit for human occupancy and use, and the demolition of such existing structures within the City of Springfield, and providing for the issuance of permits and collection of fees. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen of Springfield, Tennessee as follows. Ordinance 14-17 is hereby rescinded in its entirety, and Title 12 of the Springfield Municipal Code is hereby amended by deleting Chapter 7 entitled Property Maintenance Code in its entirety and substituting a new Chapter 7 entitled Property Maintenance Code to read as set forth in Exhibit A attached. All ordinances, resolutions, and policies in conflict herewith are hereby rescinded to the extent of the conflict only.
Thank you. Questions on this?
To me, this is a real pertinent ordinance to keep some structure,
Yes, sir.
because some of our citizens violated a lot. So I just want to put it out there that we definitely want a clean, organized, and safe city. We're just not going to tolerate just anything, even though it's a new thing I'm gonna put out here. I just kind of discovered that we're having some homeless camps, so we just may have to step up on those too. But to me, my desire is to keep a clean and orderly town.
Yes, sir.
So,
I think we all feel that way. Totally agree. Any other discussion? No other questions, no discussion? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 2.7, discuss if possible take action on ordinance 23-12. Ordinance amending ordinance 14-18 relative to the adoption of the energy conservation codes. Motion made by Alderman Hubbard and a second by Alderman Green to discuss. Ms. Melissa, it's your turn to read it.
Ordinance 23-12, an ordinance amending Title 12, Chapter 12 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Energy Conservation Code. Whereas the Board of Mayor and Aldermen recognize the need for a modern, up-to-date energy conservation code addressing the design of energy-efficient building envelopes and installation of energy-efficient mechanical lighting and power systems through requirements emphasizing performance. And whereas the International Energy Conservation Code is designed to meet these needs through model code regulations that will result in the optimal utilization of fossil fuel and non-depletable resources in all communities, large and small. And whereas this comprehensive energy conservation code establishes minimum regulations for energy-efficient buildings using prescriptive and performance-related provisions. And whereas it is founded on broad-based principles that make possible the use of new materials and new energy-efficient designs. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen of Springfield, Tennessee as follows. Ordinance 18-12 is hereby rescinded in its entirety, and Title 12 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Building, Utility, etc. Codes is hereby amended by deleting Chapter 12 entitled Energy Conservation Code in its entirety and substituting a new Chapter 12 to read as set forth in Exhibit A attached. All ordinances, resolutions, and policies in conflict herewith are hereby rescinded to the extent of the conflict only.
Thank you. Motion was made by Alderman Hubbard, a second by Alderman Green. Do we have discussion for the staff? No questions? I'd say everybody's done their homework great. They prepared great notes in our iPads, and I thank you for that, for the staff. No discussion? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 2.8, discuss and possible take action on ordinance 23-13, ordinance amending ordinance 14-19 relative to the adoption of a fire code. We have a motion by Alderman Green to discuss, and do we have a second? Second by Alderman Gregg. Ms. Melissa Brown is going to read the first reading.
Ordinance 23-13, an ordinance amending Title 7, Chapter 2 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Fire Code. Whereas it has it has become necessary for the City of Springfield to update its fire codes to be consistent with those adopted by the state of Tennessee. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen of Springfield, Tennessee as follows. Ordinance 14-19 is hereby rescinded in their entirety, and Title VII of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Fire Prevention and Fireworks is hereby amended by deleting Chapter 2 entitled Fire Code in its entirety and substituting a new Chapter 2 to read as set forth in Exhibit A attached. All ordinances, resolutions, and policies in conflict herewith are hereby rescinded to the extent of the conflict only.
Thank you. Questions, discussion? On the fire code. No questions? We're ready. Yes, sir.
I guess I'm trying to ask you this, Chief. Are we having many problems of people not really complying with this regulation?
This is something new with the new inspector that we're still out enforcing, so it's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Discussion? No questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 2.9, discuss and possible take action on ordinance 23-14, or ordinance amending ordinance 14-20 relative to the adoption of a gas code. Do we have a motion? Motion made by Alderman Green, a second by Alderman Hubbard to discuss. Ms. Melissa Brown, will you please read the first reading?
Yes. Ordinance 23-14, an ordinance amending Title 19, Chapter 3 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Gas Code. Whereas code officials recognize the need for a modern, up-to-date fuel gas code addressing the design and installation of fuel gas systems and gas-fired appliances through requirements emphasizing performance. And whereas the International Fuel Gas Code is designed to meet these needs through model code regulations that safeguard the public health and safety in all communities, large and small. And whereas this comprehensive fuel gas code establishes minimum regulations for fuel gas systems and gas-fired appliances using prescriptive and performance-related provisions. And whereas it is founded on broad-based principles that make possible the use of new materials and new fuel gas system and appliance designs. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen of Springfield, Tennessee as follows. Ordinance 14-20 is hereby rescinded in its entirety, and Title 19 of the Springfield Municipal Code entitled Electricity and Gas is hereby amended by deleting Chapter 3 entitled Gas Code in its entirety and substituting a new Chapter 3 to read as set forth in Exhibit A attached. All ordinances, resolutions, and policies in conflict herewith are hereby rescinded to the extent of the conflict only.
Thank you. Discussion? Any questions? No questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 2.10, discuss and possible take action on ordinance 23-16, ordinance adopting the existing building codes. We have a motion by Alderman Gregg and a second by Alderman Green. Ms. Melissa, will you read this?
Ordinance 23-16, an ordinance to amend Title 12 of the Springfield Municipal Code by adding Chapter 13 entitled Existing Building Code. Whereas the Board of Mayor and Aldermen recognize the need for a modern, up-to-date existing building code to provide flexibility in addressing the design and installation of mechanical systems emphasizing performance, permit the use of alternative approaches to achieve compliance with minimum requirements to safeguard the public health, safety, and welfare insofar as they are affected by the repair, alteration, change of occupancy, addition, and relocation of existing buildings. And whereas it is necessary to adopt a building code establishing the minimum regulations governing the conditions and maintenance of all property, buildings, and structures by providing the standards for supplied utilities and facilities and other physical things and conditions essential to ensure that structures are safe, sanitary, and fit for occupation and use, and the condemnation of buildings and structures unfit for human occupancy and use, and the demolition of such structures. And whereas it is necessary to adopt a residential building code regulating the design, construction, quality of materials, erection, installation, alteration, repair, location, relocation, replacement, addition to, use, or maintenance of 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses not more than 3 stories in height, and providing for the issuance of permits and collection of fees therefore. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen of Springfield, Tennessee as follows. Title 12 of the Springfield Municipal Code is hereby amended by adding Chapter 13 entitled International Existing Building Code, 2018 edition, in its entirety to read as set forth in Exhibit A attached. All ordinances, resolutions, and policies in conflict herewith are hereby rescinded to the extent of the conflict only.
Thank you. Any questions on the building code? Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm proud of, how we're moving to tear down some old, say, ugly buildings, unsafe buildings. And, so we're working at it.
Any questions?
Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I add one thing about this particular one. This is adopting, for the first time, an existing building code. We currently do not have the existing building code adopted. And when I say existing building code, I don't mean the existing code, I mean an existing building. So, as you know, we have a lot of historical buildings, and oftentimes it's a challenge for, as a city staff and as someone who's coming in to rehab an old building, to try to come into compliance with the new code. And there are some small provisions in the building code, the primary building code, about that, but the existing building code will give us a lot more availability to work with folks into being safe and compliant in the historical buildings. So this one is a new one. The rest of them are updates, but this is the new one.
Thank you for pointing that out. It is hard when you have somebody going into an existing building, especially on the square in the
Exactly.
historic district. Any questions? No questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 2.11, discuss and possible take action on ordinance 23-15, or ordinance abandoning certain right-of-ways on Delight Court. Motion made by Vice Mayor Harris, is second by Alderman Gregg to discuss. Let's see, this is a first reading, so we'll call on Ms. Brown to read.
Ordinance 23-15, an ordinance abandoning the right-of-way in a portion of Delight Court located south of the Industrial Drive and Reed Road intersection. Whereas Everest Donsky with Electrolux Home Products has requested an abandonment of a portion of Delight Court and right-of-way being approximately 50 feet in width and 643.17 feet in length, being a total of 32,931 square feet to be abandoned by the City of Springfield. And whereas the Springfield Planning Commission has reviewed the request on April 6, 2023, and recommends the roadway and right-of-way to be abandoned. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen of Springfield, Tennessee as follows. The roadway and right-of-way located between map 080N, Group A, parcel 67, and map 080N, Group A, parcel 65 of the tax maps of Robertson County, approximately .76 acres, shown in Exhibit A attached, will be abandoned by the City of Springfield. Easements for all existing utilities owned or maintained by the City of Springfield utility departments within this right-of-way will be conveyed to the respective utility departments and shown on Exhibit B. Owner of the property shall be responsible for obtaining all surveys and legal adjustments to amend the property deeds of properties involved and shall be responsible for all costs for said work. All ordinances and policies in conflict herewith are hereby rescinded to the extent of the conflict only. This roadway and right-of-way abandonment shall become effective following its second and final passage as required by law.
Thank you. We're gonna let you get a drink of water and take a break for a minute. We're just preparing you for budget season. Okay. I'm gonna call on our city manager, Mr. Ryan Martin.
Yes, ma'am, that was a nice warm-up for next month, because next month will be,
Does anybody wonder about budget? Used to be a lot worse. We've cut a lot of it out.
so this one is, I'll take you back a little bit to the Electrolux expansion project. And when Electrolux built their, I guess it was about a $500 million expansion. If you remember, Industrial Drive, a new Industrial Drive, if you will, was cut through and connected. The intent from the beginning was for us to abandon this right-of-way, which now sits in between two Electrolux parcels. So when we brought you all, if you look on the third page in your packet, on page 3, you'll see the little cul-de-sac, what is and will be Delight Court moving forward, if and when you all abandon this right-of-way. And we named, Robertson County 911 Addressing asked us to name that roadway in anticipation of abandoning the future right-of-way, which is why it was named Delight Court. And so you'll see where the right-of-way to be abandoned is just past that cul-de-sac, but that's the reason the cul-de-sac was put in there. This was a TDOT project. TDOT was instrumental in this project. And the right-of-way to be abandoned is from there to what is, I guess, the former Industrial Drive, or that Electrolux, where that Electrolux Drive and Industrial Drive meet. So it might be a little confusing, because the project, this has been 5 or 6 years in the making, but if you have any questions, we'll be glad to answer those.
Questions? It has been a long time since we discussed this, but I do remember.
I mean, once we abandon it, we're not responsible for anything there.
That's correct, and most likely Electrolux will cut it off. They'll gate it, they'll fence it, it will be Electrolux property only. And so we're abandoning it as public right-of-way, because now Industrial Drive, as you know, goes around. So there's no need for this, and that's why that Industrial Drive, the new section, was built to allow Electrolux's campus to be one campus, and this become part of their
And
campus.
that's between that and the old Holly.
Correct.
Building.
That's exactly right.
Any other questions? No other questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 2.12, discuss and possible take action on Resolution 23-11, a resolution to support the city application for the local Parks and Recreation Fund grant from the Tennessee Department of Environmental and Conservation. Motion made by Alderman Gregg to discuss, and a second by Alderman Hubbard. My first question to Mr. Terry Martin is going to be, when are we going to hear about some of these grants?
This application is due Wednesday.
Yes, sir.
So we should get word back in October.
We're going to win, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Love these grants. No,
Love the grants, love the parks,
got the best park
proud of
system.
our parks, we're proud of the workers, proud of all our workers, but we have to want the parks right now. Very proud of that.
Any other discussion? No discussion, we're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Our administrative agenda, 3.1, discuss and possible take action on the adjustment of the retail electric rates of the Springfield Electric Department due to the wholesale fuel cost adjustments by the Tennessee Valley Authority. A motion made by Alderman Green, a second by Alderman Trotter. Mr. Terry?
Yes, ma'am.
Do
Looks
you-
like it's going up 3.5.
We like this way, not that way.
It's going up, but it's been going down.
Okay.
Nice, Les.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that info. As for the audience and for anyone else that's listening and on Facebook Live, this is something that we have to do every month. We pick on him, I pick on him, because, you know, he is just bringing the information to us, and that's a pass-through. So Want to make sure everybody understands that. So we need to talk about that from time to time. Any questions?
Let it run.
Okay, we're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 3.2, discuss and possible take action on the adjustments of the monthly gas rates of the Springfield Gas Department. Motion made by Alderman Hubbard, a second by Alderman Trotter. Mr. Dean Scott is here to give us some information.
Well, if you like Terry's, you're really gonna like this one.
Yours should be going down.
It's a 14.4%.
No, it doesn't. Wow. Okay. Any questions?
What is this, the so-called reason for this, all companies are giving?
It's kind of across the board with gasoline. We expect it to go down by the projections in the future. Next month, it should be down.
Thanks, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Mayor, I'll
Yes, sir.
add, if you look at your chart, which is very helpful because a 14.4% increase in the purchased gas adjustment. So let's make sure it's not a 14.4% rate increase, it's a 14.4% increase in the purchased gas adjustment. But if you look at your chart at the back of the packet, you'll see that our natural gas rates are still lower than they were in January and in December.
Much
So
lower.
we're still better off than we were in, if you look back at September and October where we were really high. So we're still in good shape.
Mr. Martin, he doesn't get to come often, so we're gonna pick on him.
That's right. I just wanted to reassure everyone that while it is heading in the wrong direction temporarily, we're still much better than we were last summer, fall, and winter.
Yeah. Any questions? No questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 3.3, discuss and possible take action on the ratification of an emergency purchase by the Parks and Recreation Department to replace a storage building destroyed by tree damage. Motion made by Alderman Hubbard, a second by Alderman Green. I don't have to tell you about the storms. I think every subdivision in the city of Springfield's had trees down. It affected the city of Springfield's buildings too. Any questions?
I'm crying because I planted a beautiful Georgia pine about 30 years ago. It got about 75 feet.
It's sad.
So I'm still sad about that.
This purchase is all covered by insurance, correct?
With the exception of the deductible, yes, sir. We also had some equipment damaged in the building as well that is covered by insurance.
Thank you for pointing that out. Any other questions? No questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 3.4, discuss and possible take action on an offer from John Fox to purchase land in the North Industrial Park. Motion made by Vice Mayor Harris, a second by Alderman Hubbard. Questions on this purchase?
City manager.
Yes, sir. Mr. Hubbard has a question.
Okay, yes, sir.
Well, you kind of
You
explained.
give it a little overview, sure. So this is, if you look at there's a map that is in the, it's on the northwest side, if you will, of Pinnacle Drive, across Pinnacle Drive from the property that you all just approved an offer to purchase by Agremont, the Belgian margarine company. This is 0.6 acres. It is kind of a difficult parcel. Mr. Fox has offered $25,200 for 0.6 acres, so that roughly equates to $46,000, I think, for an acre. So it's just shy of the $50,000 per acre that you all just approved, Agremont's purchase. We consider that a fair offer because the building envelope, I was speaking with Mr. Brewer, the building envelope for that parcel is going to be kind of difficult. It is not as premium land as the property that we just sold across the street. because of the odd shape of the parcel. So we consider it a fair offer, with one exception, and that is that Mr. Fox's offer asked for the city to purchase title insurance policy for the buyer. We don't generally do that as a matter of practice. We will convey a warranty deed, but we don't purchase title insurance we don't expend any funds over and above preparing the instruments. So we would ask that if you all do accept the offer, you would do that subject to the purchaser agreeing to provide his own title insurance policy.
So do we need to amend it?
I think the motion could be,
There's no motion.
yeah, I believe the motion could be to accept the offer subject to him purchasing his own title insurance policy.
So moved.
Motion's been made. Motion made by Vice Mayor Harris, a second by Alderman Hubbard. Any questions on this purchase?
Did he,
That's with him doing his own title, right?
Correct, purchasing his own title insurance policy.
did he state what the property's gonna be used for?
Commercial development is all we were told, not anything specific. There's a lot of, with the exception of Agremont, the purchase before that you all approved was spec building, so I would imagine this would be a spec building as well.
Okay. Other questions? Not much land left up there.
Not much, about 30 acres left.
Okay.
So virtually, if he comes back and says he's not gonna purchase his own title insurance, then the deal's off.
Correct, yeah, because otherwise your acceptance of his offer would be contingent upon him agreeing to strike that provision from the agreement.
Okay. Other discussion, questions? No other questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 3.5, discuss and possible take action to ratify the emergency purchase of 2 Toyota Tacoma trucks in the amount of $61,674 from Allen J. Fleet Sales of Sebring, Florida, as a sole source utilizing the SWC 209. Motion made by Alderman Trotter to discuss, a second by Alderman Green. Our city manager, Mr. Brian Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. These are, as the agenda packet says, these are trucks for meter reading. This is a ratification of an emergency purchase. Supply chain, as it pertains to vehicles, is still a major problem. We have vehicles that we have ordered for quite some time that we haven't gotten, and so these two came available. I believe they were in Florida, and so we have some meter reading trucks that are in desperate need of deadlining, and so we are requesting you all ratify this purchase for the 2 trucks that were budgeted. We just did not get to bring them to you before the purchase because it's one of those situations where if they have them on the lot and if we don't commit to them, we don't get them.
And it's what I hear anytime I go to meetings across the state.
It's
Everybody's got the same problem.
very difficult right now.
Even individuals trying to buy trucks.
These are new, correct?
They are, yes, sir.
Any discussion, questions? No questions, we're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 3.6, discuss and possible take action on the selection of a firm to conduct the city's comprehensive growth plan. Motion made by Alderman Gregg and a second by Alderman Hubbard to discuss. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So we have before you tonight a selection for the firm Reagan Smith. As you know, we talked about during, it was for this budget year, we are on a journey of doing studies and plans because we did not have really studies and plans to go by. And so one of those, we did the system development fee, we're doing the facility study currently, and we did the parks master plan. Now the comprehensive growth plan is a study that we actually don't technically have one, and that's not really good for a city that's growing like we are. We need to know where we're going. And so we had budgeted an amount, and shocker, that came in higher than we had budgeted it, but that's okay. We feel like after the committee sifted through these firms and selected a firm and negotiated an agreement that we're comfortable with. The agreement also incorporates doing some professional services review for us. As a side note, we have a 400-acre annexation that will be coming before you soon that will contain a specific change in our zoning regulations that will be proposed. And so we would like for someone that has done this before to review that, what we put together before we bring it to the planning commission. This firm has done that, and so one of the provisions of this agreement is to do an hourly based service component for that as well. And so, but primarily it's a professional services agreement to do the comprehensive plan. And if you have any questions, we'll be glad to answer that.
Quite frankly, I didn't think you'd find somebody for that price when we started talking about it.
These studies used to cost $50,000 or $60,000, and now
Yeah.
we're just gonna have to adjust our price point, I guess.
I remember the last one we did. A lot cheaper, wasn't it?
Where are we on the facility study?
Facility study report is almost finished. We have a review of that draft on the 27th of this month, so there's a better than average chance you all will see it in May.
Okay. Thank you.
If not, it'll be June, but it's soon.
Okay. Questions? Discussion?
Comment.
Yes, sir.
We definitely need it, and they put a little icing on the cake. The good book say, without a vision, the people perish. So to know where we're going, we definitely need this.
Yes, sir. Questions? No questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank y'all for working on this study, because I know that was not easy. We seem to be asking for a lot of things that is hard to stay in budget at this point. 3.7, discuss and possible take action on the fiscal year 2024 budget approval by the Springfield-Robertson County Joint Airport Board. Motion made by Alderman Green and a second by Alderman Hubbard to discuss. Our city manager, Mr. Ryan Martin.
Cap off on the comprehensive plan, that will be something that you all will be heavily invited to participate in at times as well.
And should.
And yes, we would definitely highly encourage and appreciate your participation in the input on that, as well as probably our planning commission and various members of the community. It'll be open to the public to be able to participate in that study. On this particular item, the airport, as you know, by state law is required to pass and approve a budget and send to you for the city and the county by April the 1st of each year. They have done so. That budget is attached and included. As you see in my notes at the beginning of the agenda item, there is a $75,000 request from each entity to balance their FY24 budget. As you know, they requested $46,000 from each entity last year. We approved that, the county did not. And so what I want to break down is of the $75,000, $23,275 of that match is specifically earmarked toward personnel, employee pay and benefits. The airport board lags behind reasonable employers in its offerings with regard to pay and benefits. Currently, and up until a couple of months ago, airport employees did not receive any vacation leave, they did not receive any sick leave, they did not receive health insurance, any health offering, or retirement benefits. They've got their hourly wage, and that was it. And so the airport board is working diligently on that to get them on TCRS, to try to get them on the state health plan, which I think that has fallen through, last I heard last week. So exploring some opportunities there. But 23,000 of that is earmarked for, in their budget, you can see, for employee pay and benefits. The remaining 51,875 is for capital projects. There is a problem out there with the underground fuel storage tank. I mean, the problem being that it's old, I mean, frankly, and the EPA is kind of, it's past where the EPA wants that to be. And so they are, that's a larger project. You can see, I believe that project is over $1 million. And so there is some grant money that is available from the state and federal government on that, and they're asking us to pick up some of the rest of that. it's at the board's pleasure what you would like to do, some guidance. I think this is always a confusing issue because I don't know that if you vote on the airport's budget tonight that you're approving the budget necessarily. If you do reject it, let us know. Or if you reject it, vote no, and we'll send it back to them, and they'll have to do something differently. But I don't know how that actually works from a state law perspective. I do have the $75,000 currently in our proposed budget that we'll have delivered to you next week. It has not affected our outcome to a great extent. So if the board pleasure is to keep it, and approve this budget as it is, we've got it in our budget currently.
The county
Yes.
met on it yet?
Not yet.
They'll meet.
So, May.
The budget committee will meet on it first, and then the county's budget committee, and that's where it got killed last year. I don't think it made it to the full budget of the county commission on the floor, but yeah, it'll be well into May, probably, at least before the county hears it.
Okay.
So, I mean, by reading your statement here, are you not in favor of the second part of it?
Yes, I wanted to make it clear that the first part is without a doubt needed. So, I mean, if my recommendation to you all is if you're not willing to go along with the capital costs, that's why I wanted to break that out, and you can see it broken out in their budget as well. They're in desperate need of getting that. With only 4 employees, without those employees, that airport can't operate. And if the airport can't operate, then it's not able to rent hangars and sell fuel, which is how that airport primarily makes its.
But if we pass this, where it's not putting us in a bind,
No, sir.
I have no problem with it contingent upon the county passing
Okay.
also. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, we won't spend the money. If the county, just like this year, if the county does not approve that, we will not convey any of those funds to the airport.
It's a dual role.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
I concur with passing it because the airport is one of the main attractions to coming to Springfield. So,
And I do understand the board has worked very hard to get a manager.
yes.
They have a very nice facility.
They do.
Yes, they do.
We've had the opportunity to be there the last 2 years for our planning meeting, and they have a nice layout. So I would move to approve, as long as the county approves also.
Discussion? Questions? No questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 3.8, discuss and possible take action on amending Title IX, Chapter 2 of the Springfield Municipal Codes pertaining to transit vendors. We need a motion. Do we have a motion? It's not working, our technology's not working. Hold on just a second.
You can do a voice and she can click it.
So move.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second discussion on this.
Ask the city manager to give some explanation. I was a little bit confused. I was
Yeah.
confused on a couple of items.
Okay, sure. So this stems from the strategic planning discussion about transient vendors, and so we got with the chamber and put out a survey to the business community to sort of get some feedback. Our staff internally was sort of, you can see it both ways, and trying to figure out how to give you all some sort of guidance or suggestions. And so we solicited some feedback from the business community, got some great feedback. Actually, if you notice, we've got over 100 responses to the survey, which was awesome. And that was very telling. So there were 6 questions, five questions, and 6 was open-ended. So we've got some good feedbacks, and if we walk through the questions one by one, you can see that question 1, you had a lot of folks that were sort of split on their level of support for transient vendors. Obviously, there was some confusion in the survey. Some folks did not read that food trucks were not included in this, so some of the comments we received dealt with food trucks. But but that's okay. Between the two primary points of concern, which we've all talked about, which business owners bring up, which are the economic impact because of the sales tax domicile issue and the competitive disadvantage because of lower overhead costs, you can see that you had 62 of those responses, or 60% of the responses were more concerned about the sales and property taxes not being paid in the community. There were 33% of respondents who were concerned about the competitive disadvantage, and then 30% who were not concerned at all about either one of those. We ask about feedback on duration of permits, and a maximum of 14 consecutive days was the leader. No more than 3 months in a calendar year was second. So as you can see, if you aggregate those two responses, that's 68% almost of your respondents that said, hey, there needs to be a limit on these permits. If you go to question 4, we really didn't derive anything of any substantive value there other than not many folks, we had 34% that did not favor limiting the hours of transient vendors. So that was good. We can, knock that one out. Folks in question 5 did respond to the permit fee and said, hey, if that's the case, they need to pay more than what they're paying now. And so you can see that a majority of those, 32% thought the annual permit fee needed to be $400 or more. And so that's obviously for an annual permit fee, you had a good portion of folks. Everyone, 91% of folks, or just a little over 90%, were $100 or more. So that was telling. Question 6 is where we really derived our information because that was open-ended. It said, do you have any other thoughts or suggestions on transient vendors? And we've got people to tell us whatever they like, even if that was, I think food trucks bring a nice variety to the area, which we agree, but we weren't talking about food trucks specifically in this one. So we got a lot of good stuff, and there are a lot of good comments I'm sure you all looked at. What we came up with is if the board would like to relax the current restrictions on transient vendors, the suggestion that we would make if the board was going to relax that would be we could keep permits at 14 days, but allow as many 14-day permits within a year as the vendor desires. To raise the permit fee, we would suggest $250 because that basically amounts to $500 a month, right? And so that's going to be substantially lower than rent. It's going to be lower than utilities. So it still offers that low barrier to entry that we talked about achieving at strategic planning. The third suggestion we would make if the board wishes to relax the access for transient vendors is to require the display of a 4-foot by 6-foot sign at the vendor location with the name of the permittee and the permit number. The purpose behind this is twofold. The concern that universally that I heard from you all, the board, that I heard from the survey, that we heard from our staff, is that we used to have a 2.5-mile long yard sale on Memorial Boulevard.
Yes.
And we don't want that again. Because what happens is you have 1 or 2 vendors with well-intended hearts who want to show up and offer their goods and wares to the community. And then you have a bunch of people from out of town who think, hey, it's fair game. We can just all set up wherever we want to in these parking lots. And it creates a flea market of sorts that lasts all the way down Memorial Boulevard. So what we would ask is that you would require a 4-foot by 6-foot, a really large, almost unattractive sign at the vendor location, not intentionally unattractive, but what that does is that allows our code staff and our police department staff, when they're driving by, to know who's supposed to be there and who's not. That way, but what it also serves is any other vendor, the potential vendor that's coming to town will see that and say, oh, I better get a permit. So I don't just need to set up without permission. So it greatly helps with enforcement, and they can make the sign as attractive as they'd like, as long as it's visible from a distance, as long as it's not an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that they put on the side, as long as our enforcement staff driving by could be able to see if the person is permitted or not, would greatly help and help us keep the issues down to a minimum while still allowing folks that want that low barrier to entry to test their product, entrepreneurs to do that. Obviously, if the board wishes to do nothing, then, based on the survey results, then that's fine too. Also, a couple of you had mentioned about restricting the areas. That is something that, if you're interested in, we can get into detail on about how, where, in what zoning classifications, or in what, creating an overlay where transient vendors could operate, we could talk about that. Things that we cannot do from a legal perspective are only allow vendors who are domiciled in Springfield. That's unconstitutional. Or only allow vendors who are domiciled in Robertson County. Or only allow vendors who sell this particular product. Or only allow vendors, there are certain things that we cannot require them to get a business license. We cannot require them to pay taxes to us. None of those things are allowed. It is, we must regulate it in those manners that we discussed. So with that,
Thank you. We've already started to see people having yard sales on Memorial Boulevard on Saturdays. Not this past weekend, but the Saturday before. I noticed that we already had some people set up for yard sale type somewhere between McDonald's and the old Shoney's building. In my opinion, how do we regulate this, the vendors, to not look like yard sales? We don't have the authority to do it, in my opinion.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So currently, we are at 14 consecutive days for a $25 permit, and you can only get one of those permits per year.
per year.
Okay.
It's fairly restricted.
What you're suggesting is to keep it at 14 consecutive days, but as many permits as they would want in a year's time at $250 a permit.
Sure, and the rationale behind that, when we met and discussed, was that if you operate all year long, you pay $500 a month.
Okay.
If you choose, some entrepreneurs may want to set up for 14 days at a time, or 1 month at a time, or at various points throughout the year to test their product and test their market. And so we don't want to require them to pay a $400, $500 annual permit fee if they are only going to set up 2 days, and do an annual permit. So we thought that a 14-day permit was fairly consistent with what we had right now, but allowing them to get as many of those as they would like.
But you're going from $25 to $250, which,
Correct.
I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I guess my question would be, currently, under the present structure that we have, how are we enforcing that? Because the majority, I think, of what we see happening is gonna be on the weekend, which is gonna fall on Chief Head and his department, because the codes people don't work on the weekend. And I'm sure Chief has more to do than riding up down the road checking 4x6 signs to make sure, but it's not, it's also, as she just said, it's not fair for someone to set up just a general yard sale and have no permit at all, where this one here has bought their $250 permit. So how do we enforce it?
Currently, enforcement is very difficult. Now, our code staff, we do have them work on Saturdays during those times when, we've had them work certain hours to enforce, to supplement the police department's efforts. That's the challenge with, and that's why, and it doesn't have to be a 4x6 sign, but that's the problem. When a police officer, and we've worked on some things internally about how to create because food trucks are the enforcement issue. Transient vendors really not, that's just not, we don't have hardly any transient vendors. Occasionally you have one. I think there's one set up over the weekend. We just don't have that many of them. So that's not our enforcement issue. The enforcement issue becomes food trucks. Food truck that comes to town, sees another food truck in town, says, "Oh, I'll set up there. I'll set up in Springfield too." And our police officers and our codes officers not having a readily available repository of seeing who are the current food truck active permit holders to know. So that's something we've worked on internally to try to allow enforcement, because what we found in the food truck community is they know who does and who doesn't have a permit. And they will call if someone doesn't have a permit that is operating in Springfield. And so we don't want it to appear that we're not enforcing. We just need to equip our folks to enforce better. With the transient vendors, that's why it would be easier to be visibly identifiable. If they would place something that from the road, a codes inspector or police officer driving by could see, if they had it posted, they have a permit. Now, could they put up a sign and make up a permit number? Sure. They could do that too. But that is a lot of effort for a transient vendor. But it would make enforcement a lot easier and also signal to other folks, like we said, signal to potential vendors to let them know, hey, it's not a free-for-all. You can't just come and set up shop whenever you want to, however you want to. There's a process, so you should probably contact someone about that permit.
I'd like to say something. First of all, I think that having the survey open to the community was a fantastic decision, because I think it's really nice. I mean, you know, as an alderman, you occasionally hear from people who have an opinion, but it's really nice to have solicited more feedback, so I think that was great. I personally think that this is good. I think that it doesn't make sense for our community to have, you know, kind of updated the rules for food trucks, but not have somewhat updated the rules for other vendors who are of similar kind. I think that, you know, making it the permit rise in cost, I mean, that's gonna contribute. If someone actually, I did the math, it would be like over $6,000 a year if someone was like, I'm gonna pay a $14 or 14 day permit every single day of the year. And that's, you know, no one's gonna do that, but you know, it's income to the city. And so I think it definitely puts up a higher barrier, a higher standard for it to not be abused. I think that the display is a good option as well. Again, it leaves it open if you're serious about wanting to conduct business and explore that. You're gonna have to do a little bit of work to do that, but it leaves the door open for those people who are committed to doing that. I don't foresee people using this to host a yard sale. I don't see that being an issue. I think they're very different things. I think the only other thing I might suggest is just on that 4x6 sign requiring the permit to be a certain size, like the permitting actual, maybe like letter size or something like that to make it convenient for those enforcing it. But personally, I would like to see something like this, and I appreciate the thought that the city staff has put into coming up with these suggestions, because I think that they're hitting a lot of the criteria that would be problematic.
Other discussion?
What she said.
I would be one
Sir?
I would be one of the people that would like to see it in an area like maybe the fairgrounds or something like that.
That'd be really
where-
nice.
Where it's just not strode up and down the highway.
I think that's another great idea.
I
Again,
love
kind of
that.
having a more narrowed area. I think that also accomplishes, again, it's still leaving open the possibility for people who are committed and want to do that, but limiting it, but it's still an opportunity.
I think it looks better all the way around, and we're gonna all go shop there because we know they're going to be there in a particular area. I don't have to go hunt them.
You also said this would not affect some of the farmers that have the produce permit or whatever we call it.
Correct, that's
That's under
a
different.
different section of the code, yes.
Yes, sir, Mr. Hubbard.
Also, Mr. Head has the largest, one of the largest lots. So if he give permission, I mean, he still must comply with. Okay, that's what I want to know, because
Yes, sir. I think if you're asking someone that's operating a business, now, if they're setting up a, you know, if they're doing a fundraiser, carnival fair for the local youth organization, and they're selling popcorn or something like that. We had that issue come up recently, and that's not regulated. That's not something
Okay,
that the
because he
city
generally does
regulates.
stuff like
But
that.
someone operating a for-profit venture, you know, operating a business that is open and available to the public, is regulated by the city and allowed to be regulated by the city, and that's contemplated by these regulations.
I mean, I would be in favor too of the centralized area, but I don't know where we're gonna get that from. So I think we need to be prepared to cover what we can cover. Otherwise, I mean, the city has no lot that we can use for a
Correct.
centralized lot.
I think that's the biggest challenge with the centralized area. If you really wanted to concentrate it in like what we would call an overlay, is unless the private property owners gave permission in that area, then you've kind of ruled it out, basically. And we do not have an area at the present time that we have available for transient vendors.
Other discussion?
So I assume we need a motion on this to adopt what
I was
you
gonna
want
ask,
to
is it
adopt,
worth
or-
considering the, like, further consideration of the overlay issue, or do we need to vote on it as it is today?
No, you're not, you're not required to do, I mean, you can it's however you all want to proceed. And so we brought this, like we talked about at strategic planning, brought the discussion points back to you all, the feedback from the community, and some suggestions as starting points to see if you all would like to go in one direction or the other. The overlay discussion, well, we can certainly have the overlay discussion, and if you all have a consensus that you would like us to bring back in the form of an ordinance, that's what we would do. So but the overlay, we would, the difficult part is with a zoning classification, if you allowed it in a zoning classification and disallowed it in other zoning classifications, you're pretty much including state highways, because between our commercial services and commercial general districts, you would catch a lot of area there. If you wanted to concentrate it in one area, you're limiting it to just a handful of parcels
Right.
of private property that could be counterintuitive in a sense that unless there was a specific, like if the fairgrounds, for instance, said, hey, we'd like them to set up here, and so we regulated transient vendors to just set up at the fairgrounds, which is a great location for them. It's perfectly set up for something like that. But that would have to be in an agreement, to make that work.
Is it worth that conversation prior to making decisions on this?
I don't see how we will come up with something.
Yeah.
Unless we have a lot to provide,
Right.
and we don't have that.
Right. Well, then I'll motion that we basically adopt what's been provided here, perhaps with the contingency of adding that requirement for the permitting numbers to be a certain size
Certain.
for enforcement.
And to bring that back in the form of an ordinance
Yes.
next month, okay. And of course I'm sorry, she made a motion.
We have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Your motion is to do is
Motion.
what's laid out.
Yes, just what's in the
It's laid
what's in the
out.
proposal.
So it goes
Lay it
down.
out for an ordinance.
Yes, to have it come back as an ordinance.
I'll second
Thank
that.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on this motion? Make sure we understand it. And I will say this thought. I will quote Mr. Jerome Ellis. If we need to change it later, that's what we do. We can see how it goes and move forward. Sounds like we might need to tweak the food truck.
Fine tune it, yes.
Food truck and put up signs so the police department can see if they're in.
Absolutely.
Any other discussion? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. 3.9, discuss and possible take action on the appointment to various boards and commissions. We have a motion to discuss this list. Motion made by Alderman Green, a second by Alderman Trotter. That was in your packet on your computer. Do you have any questions about the appointment? No questions? We're ready for a vote. Anyone like to change their vote? Please record the votes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. There are no consent items on the agenda. I will turn it over to our city manager, Mr. Ryan Martin.
Mayor, would you like to
Yes.
work on the scheduling of the budget work session?
Yes, sir. It's budget season, as we all know, and we need a workshop. Would May 9th work at 6 PM for you in this room? Last year, I think we met for about an hour, if I remember correctly. May 9th at 6 PM.
Yes.
May what now?
May 9th.
Oh,
It is a Tuesday. Yes, sir, in this room. Is that good with everyone? Yeah, we're gonna kick them out by 6
We've got
o'clock.
it covered, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we good with this, gentlemen? Yes, yes. Mr. Harris?
We're at 6.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Mr. Gregg?
Good.
All right, I've heard from Ms. Green.
All right.
That's good.
Thank you. That will be our annual budget work session where we have an opportunity, it is open to the public, but where we sit and can go through and explain different things in the budget and have an opportunity to have you all, your questions answered and an opportunity for you all to review and get your questions answered prior to voting on it for the first time in May, which you will do. Okay, our annual community cleanup day is this Saturday. I want to let you all know how many folks actually are interested and care about what's going on in the community. It's getting close to 300 people probably signed up for our cleanup day, including employees. We've got some employees that have volunteered, which is almost triple our turnout last year. So hopefully the rain holds off. If you have not signed up and you'd like to, Clayton Moore is in the room, and he's one of the folks wearing blue over here, and he will be glad to get you signed up. We're thankful to Larry's for sponsoring breakfast again, and thankful to TVA for sponsoring again by providing supplies, and so that's a good opportunity to clean up our community. Speaking of cleanup, we have junk collection that's still going on, and our crews are behind. So I know one of you has already received kind of a concern, a comment from a resident saying, hey, this stuff's been sitting out here for a little bit. Please advise your constituents that we are deeply apologetic, but we have folks working even through the weekends to try to get this stuff picked up. What has happened is our junk collection crew and our brush collection crew, it's the same people. And so when we had the storms that took place, there's a lot more brush collection than normal, and so with junk collection on top of that, so they're running a little bit behind, not as behind as we were during COVID, when everyone was at home cleaning out their home, but still a little behind. So just ask for some patience, and we're picking it up, and our folks are doing a great job getting to that stuff. Sales tax is continuing to be strong. We're seeing good months come through and a lot of spending happen. Hopefully with some commercial development soon, sales tax will continue to trend upward. If you look at 5.0 in your packet, the airport report, that's the only thing in there this month of operations that are taking place at the airport. Wrapping up budget preparation. Charter, of course, requires us to have that to you 60 days prior to the fiscal year beginning, so I will have that delivered to you hopefully next week. Survey. We just saw the transient vendor survey. We're putting the final touches on the beer permit survey that we talked about last month. We've done some research internally on that. Natasha Tice, our public affairs coordinator, has drafted that, and we're putting some touches on that to get it out to the general public. And hopefully we'll have some feedback for you on that very soon. Also, Ms. Crockett sent the financials out. I would draw your attention if, when you look at your email, go to the last page of that. And the last page, this is our new software, and I love this, but if you go to the last page of those financials, it is page 60 of 60. You'll see it break down by fund of how the budget is performing. So if you want to read all 60 pages, that would be great. I would love for you to, and we can talk about each line item if you'd like. But if you just want to know the summary, that's at the very end of that, and that tells you how our budget is performing. And you'll see that the general fund is performing very well this year, as are a couple of our other funds. So if you have any questions on that, let me know. But Mayor, that's all I have. Thank you.
I will continue to encourage you to sign up to clean. We will all be here to pick up trash. This meeting is adjourned.